So just hello, welcome. Just wanted to let you know it's almost 7 o'clock. We're going to be doing our chat soon. If you could sort of congregate in these first rows here. This event, there was an event today that had like 9 million people here, and they asked me if they could keep the setup the same because they didn't want to break it down. So I said sure, but it's going to be awkward, but we can do it. So if you guys could kind of gather up front, it would be cool. Anyway, we're going to get started here in a minute. Yeah, so the base format here is we all hang out and chat, we have some food, and then we do the fireside chat. And it's like 45 minutes or so, we'll be chatting, and we'll also have time for you guys to ask questions. There is a really cool mic that's made of like foam that we can throw at each other. And it works. It's a working microphone, but it's also a fun toy. So anyway, I'm going to see if Slade is here. Slade, can we kill the music?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Don't. Prince already died. Don't kill Stevie Wonder. And then also, do you have like the lighting for the fireside, like the fireside lighting thing? Super cool. They have all these neat little gadgets here. And is the live stream on too?
It sure is.
Oh my gosh, we're live. Look at that. See, so they have this. They have a million chairs. Our host has gone bonkers. So this is the cool microphone I was telling you about.
Nice.
Is it actually turned on?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's all right. So we'll use that later. But anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started since I've already talked for like 5 straight minutes. But welcome, I'm Dave McLean-Scales. I run Startup Grind Austin, but Startup Grind is a global organization. It has like 400 chapters all over the world. So it comes out of Silicon Valley. They have a global conference every year out in Silicon Valley, and also they have one over in London. Super cool. I got to go to the Silicon Valley one last February. It was really cool. It was very diverse. All cultures were represented, which is really neat. And then we got to, as directors, we got to meet all the other directors from all over the world. So that was super cool. But anywho, the idea of it, and we have on there, Educate, Inspire, Connect, is hear stories from entrepreneurs from our local community. And no matter where you are over the world, your community has people who are doing cool stuff. Austin is especially blessed in this area, having so many entrepreneurs, investors, people who've done stuff. So I don't have much trouble finding people to come and be great guests here for you guys, because Austin, we've come an embarrassment of riches when it comes to this. But so anyway, connect. You're all here to connect. We're going to chat. We're going to find out about each other. We're going to see how we can help each other. That's just kind of what we do. And then hopefully some of the stories that we tell up here are inspiring and educational. Part of the thing we want to learn is, what mistakes have people made along the way? How did they overcome them? And maybe take some inspiration from their story as well. So we'll talk some about Drew's story, and also kind of how he, working in blockchain, and how he sees the future, and how he sees blockchains affecting the world order. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and invite Drew to come up here. Drew Bansal, everyone. Let's give him a warm welcome. You have your own microphone too, which we had to go with the wired mic because someone walked off with one of their wireless mics. So, but Drew is an entrepreneur. He's actually a physicist, but he is also an entrepreneur. And he co-founded InfoChimps with Joe's in the room. There's Joe. And Skip. Are you guys were the 3 founders? Flip, sorry. Flip. Excuse me, Flip. they founded that company many years ago. Was it 7 years ago, something like that? They were in the first batch of Capital Factory companies when Capital Factory was a straight-up incubator and did not have all this space. So it's pretty cool, amazing. And now a co-founder of Unchained Capital. And he does have a physics background. We'll talk about that more later. But I'm really pleased to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Clap it up, clap it up. All right. So, I have some questions here, but I think that the first thing I want to talk about is just your background. Where do you come from? Like, where did you grow up? How does your upbringing make Dhruv?
Okay, so I was born in India. Can you guys hear me? Good?
Just make sure you hold it close to you.
A little closer. I was born in India, and I moved with my folks to England when I was a small boy, and then when I was a little bit larger, I moved to the United States. I think I was like 7 years old. It was 1990, it's a while back. And I moved around tremendously all around the country as well. My parents, I don't know why, they're physicians, they should be more sessile than perhaps they were, but we lived in a lot of places. And so I think growing up, I was a bit of a chameleon, and every year or two I would have to move and make new friends and get to pretend to be a different person, slightly more popular perhaps or less than the last time, depending on how I played my cards. And I think a lot of that eventually helped me ironically hone in on like who I really am, because you're constantly always trying to be a different person, trying to have to make new friends. I think eventually you get bored of it and you just realize really what you're about, and you really hone in on your interests. And I think by the time high school got around, I was like extremely convinced that I didn't want to do quote unquote normal stuff, that I didn't want to go get a job from 9 to 5 for someone. My parents were doctors. I didn't want to be a doctor and have to get up in the middle of the night. Yeah, you cure diseases, it's very nice, but you work a lot. And our lives were really good, but it felt like my parents were always stressed out. They're always working too hard. And I think they sort of implicitly maybe even discouraged me from doing that kind of stuff. Wanted me to go do my own thing always. And so I think by the time I was in high school, like physics and being an academic and professor was like the thing that I was really interested in. I think because I didn't know anybody who was a professor. Everyone in my family, they were physicians or they were engineers or lawyers or they owned businesses. I didn't know what a professor actually did, but I had seen some movies and it seemed like an attractive way to live his life. It seemed like very cerebral, and that you can always work with young people and live a life of the mind. And it wasn't very material or superficial, or at least so I thought. And I don't think that's actually true, because I started to find out as I became a physicist, and came actually here to UT to grad school. That's where I met Joe and Flip, some of my co-founders in my last company. And it took a lot for me to kind of switch out of physics to become more of an entrepreneur. It was a journey, but I think again it was the continuation of that idea of really just going after the stuff that I'm really interested in. And even though I was already a lot of the way towards being a physicist, never letting that hold me back from doing other stuff. So, I don't know. That was a long answer.
No, that was wonderful. So, I'm curious. So you were in physics. You were telling me when we met the other day that you honed in on physics during your high school years, and that was it's kind of like all you did. Like you were super into it.
Yeah, I was really into physics and really into playing the guitar and like being trying to look smarter and cooler than people. I don't think that worked very well, but I did do a lot of physics and did do a lot of guitar in school.
And so you went to UT and you studied physics, and you were, when I first heard of you, you were like this physics PhD student who was like leaving that behind to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Like, what were you doing when you were studying physics? What did you spend your time doing?
Mostly programming on a computer, so it's kind of ironic that I became a tech entrepreneur, but it's a lot of the same kind of work. But I was here at UT. I was in the physics department up at RLM at campus, if anybody knows that, Jen Morgan's building. It was really interesting work, but I was often alone. The kind of physics that I had gotten into, which was something I really enjoyed, was statistical mechanics, and in particular numerical simulations of large, complex, hard to analyze kind of systems, and then build them on a computer. They run for a while. We try to, what do we learn? We learn equations about them, this kind of thing. It was really fun work, but it was often alone work. I was usually by myself, or occasionally working with my advisor, or maybe one or two other people in my research group. And I'm a very social person. It turns out, ironically, for a physicist. But I feel like the coolest thing about entrepreneurism, and what really was my initial one of the big hooks for me, was meeting Joe and Flip, kind of my co-founders. And I mean, they're awesome guys, and having that rapport of three people who all of them are really smart and motivated and passionate and want to work on a project together, and showing up consistently and working on it, it's really exciting. It's an exciting feeling. And comparing that to being alone, working in my box of an office in RLM, on interesting work, but being alone, it didn't hold a candle to it. I found myself during the week wanting more and more to work with Joe and Phil on this cool side project. I think, like a lot of flirtations, like you start out innocent. It wasn't supposed to be a second career or like a company or anything. It was just a side project, and it was just fun. And it was fun to work with Joe and Flip, and it consumed more and more of our time. And we started to realize that we had more and more ambition for it. And we even raised some money eventually, learned how, by talking to you and a lot of other folks here in Austin, kind of getting smarter about entrepreneurial culture. I think it was, I won't say it was hard, but it wasn't maybe as easy as it is today. Capital Factory, as you pointed out, was just starting. We were lucky enough to, as grad students, sort of get connected with Josh and Kip and a bunch of the other folks there, and make our way through, get through the application process, which was awesome because we didn't know anything about entrepreneurism at all. We didn't know the first thing about building companies. And so it was really good to learn from those folks. I don't think we actually got into the program, but it almost didn't matter. We made the right connections, and we raised money. And then suddenly I'm like, wow, this side project is more interesting, and I'm doing better at it. It feels like than my main gig. I should maybe drop the main gig. And so eventually, and sort of sadly, I guess, I quit physics. But in retrospect, I mean, I suppose I have regrets. It would be cool to finish. It'd be cool to be Dr. Bansal, I guess, instead of just old Mr. B. But I don't know. I think I'm better as an entrepreneur. I'm better at it than I ever was as a physicist. I work harder at being an entrepreneur. I enjoy it, I think, more. It has a lot of the same skills. I'm still doing a lot of math and programming. I'm still being really data-driven. I'm still having to think for myself and do a lot of research, especially the kinds of businesses I tend to be involved in. They're extremely tech-heavy. So I think I'm still getting to engage a lot of parts of myself that I liked about physics. I still approach the world as a physicist, but man, I'm better at this.
Awesome. So how did you guys come together when you were there? Like, what was the basis for Inflections to even come to fruition?
So I mentioned I was working with programming in my thesis work, so I was building these big systems and programming against them, and I also turned to getting large data sets from the internet that I could kind of download and try to analyze. And this was like 2006, 7, 8. That was just starting to become a thing, like data science. Like it wasn't really something we talked about. We didn't talk about big data or data scientists. Those terms were not really used in that area. They hadn't been coined yet. But that's the kind of work that I was doing. I just didn't call it that. I called it linear algebra. And then I met Flip, Flip and Joe and I's co-founder. He was kind of also involved in the grad program. He was another physicist, and we had the same advisor, but we had not overlapped temporally, at least until that point. And he's just a spectacularly interesting and weird person, Flip is. And I think, if you met him and anybody in town will, and I think he's a mentor at Capital Factory these days, and you may run into him. Spectacularly smart and creative person. Awesome guy to work with. Immediately someone, when you meet him, and within the first 10 minutes you've had a crazy esoteric conversation about something you can never talk to a stranger about, and you're just like, wow, we're going to be friends. So it turns out we were more than friends. We became co-founders, and we met Joe very quickly after that, and we got involved in Flip's project, which was to make data easier to share for academics like us. And since now I was working with data quite often, and it was very painful to work with, the idea made a lot of sense to me. If you guys are familiar with this company, Data.World, here in Austin, that started up recently, it's a very similar idea. Data.World is a much larger, better run, more ambitious, modern interpretation of some of the things that we were trying to do back then. But originally, I think what was cool is that as a physicist, I mean, I was programming a lot, but I didn't have a concept that like I could just go build a website. Like, I mean, Facebook had come out by then. Like, I was on Facebook, I think, and it was a few years later, but like The Social Network wasn't out as a movie, and this idea of like Zuckerberg, like the college, grad school programmer genius that can just go build an entire massive unicorn of a company, like that idea wasn't as obvious, or maybe it wasn't as much of a stereotype or trope as it is today. And even though I was writing a lot of code, and if someone had said, hey, Drew, can you write a simulation to do all this stuff with atoms and molecules, like I would have sat down and I would have done it, and it would have been cool, and I would have had confidence that I could do it. But if someone had said, please make this really complicated website that lots of people would use and would, just be live, like a real website, like the kind you use, I think I wouldn't have known where to start. I wouldn't have anticipated that I could build such a thing. I didn't realize that it's mostly just gluing stuff together, which is what I was already good at. So Flip knew that. Flip was a bit older, and he was a much more experienced programmer than I. And that was his proposed solution to this data problem: is, hey man, let's just write the web app, let's just do it. And so he did, and we helped him, and very quickly we got out infochips.org, because of course we weren't the company yet. We were just a side project, man. And it was really fun. It was fun working with Flip and Joe to write code, build a whole website, like to get people writing about us. People were so much more interested, I think, in our InfoChips work than in anything I could have ever done as a statistical physicist studying class formation and other kinds of topics. So I don't know, we really enjoyed ourselves, and I think, as I mentioned, a year or two into it, it just became clear that that's where I should be spending most of my time. We raised some money, and we were starting to move a lot more quickly as a company. And so I started, and I think I'm glad, because now I do feel, having run through one cycle as an entrepreneur, and I talk about how InfoChips grew and evolved, but having been through a cycle with a company, I now understand that, yeah, a couple of founders can figure out a market and try a couple of product ideas and build an initial version of an application and a real website and it's possible today, especially with cloud services and some of the resources that places like Capital Factory can provide, some of the mentorship. It's amazing what a couple motivated people can do. So kudos to Flip for having the vision and the courage to just go out and build something like that, and to kind of drag us along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you guys were building the company, along the way, let's just try to come up with some kind of lessons, some stories, some things that you could teach us from the experience that you went through building the company. The company was eventually acquired by Computer Sciences Corporation. But along the way, I know there were some rough spots. There was a pivot. You kind of had to make some decisions. I don't know. What can we take away from sort of your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, I think, programmers sometimes say, like, if you look back on your code from 6 months ago or from a year ago, like, and you aren't disgusted by it, it's because you haven't learned anything, or whatever. Like, you should hate your code from a couple years ago. You should be dissatisfied with your writing from a couple years ago, because everyone should be evolving and always getting better. I think it's like that for businesses too. Like, I think we worked really hard at InfoChips, and we tried our best. And we're always learning, we're always doing better and making things better and taking in good advice and swallowing our lumps and growing. But if I'm honest, I kick back, I feel like I'm a much, much better entrepreneur today. Joe probably would agree. We're both much better. The company that we're working on now is, it just feels like it's a better run, more lean, just everything is better about it. Why couldn't we have done that in the InfoChips days? Why did we make all those mistakes? Why did we not put this first and instead have these priorities? And we just didn't know any better. So there's so much that I've learned during that process. I would say probably the biggest thing, and it really stuck with us, and it drove kind of the pivot that you just alluded to, as well as our own process for kind of thinking about our next company, was pain and customers, and the difference between technology that you think is cool, or that you can sell to investors, versus technology that you can sell to customers. And that's like two very different things, it turns out. Just case in point, when we wanted to build this marketplace so that we could put all the world's data in one place, kind of like Google, but then let it come back out, which of course Google doesn't do. Like they always keep the data, you don't get to have it. So the idea was to put it all in one place, let scientists, let researchers, let journalists be able to discover any data set that they want. And that was a cool idea. I still want that thing to exist. I still want there to be a library that I can search by column type and date or whatever and come up with exactly the right structured data that I'm looking for to solve a problem. Or to answer a question. I want that to exist, but I don't know necessarily how to monetize it. Right? I don't know how to make it into a business that causes itself to exist. And at the time, the idea was so cool, and the potential of building it was maybe suddenly real because things like Hadoop and big data and the cloud were now becoming more accessible. So you can imagine a company building a product like that. And so we tried, and our investors thought it was a great idea. And of course, who wouldn't want there to be like this massive platform full of rich structured data in the sky for everybody to use? But the truth is we didn't raise enough money, and we decided that our monetization strategy was going to be marketplace driven, so people were going to have to buy and sell data on this platform. And of course, that wasn't happening nearly in the kinds of volumes that we needed it to happen. And we were getting good traction in the sense of a lot of free usage, a lot of free data, a lot of happy social media presence, and a lot of good code that was produced. But there was very little buying of data on our platform. That wasn't maybe the right way to monetize a product or a platform like this. And in fact, if you look at data.world, when I think the smarter things that they've done is that's not their business. They're not a marketplace for data. They don't live on how many data sets they sold that week or month. Instead, they're really more of a social network for data scientists. And that's a really very different tack on the problem. It's not one, I think, that in 2008 really made sense, but makes a lot more sense in 2018, and it's really smart to do it that way. And I think what they're producing is really valuable. And they don't have to worry about how many data sets they sold in month 7 of their business. And plus, they're really well funded. Brett's an awesome entrepreneur. He's got a great runway set up for that whole company for a while. And I'm a member of Data.World, again, because I want such things to exist. I've always wanted them to exist. But that's not the way that we did it. So the mistake we made was like sort of deciding that we wanted this cool thing to exist and just believing that this was one path to monetize it, and raising a bunch of money, doing that, and completely failing at it. And it took almost running out of money and having to pivot into a different business model, really looking at our strengths and realizing that out of all the things that we had done with our investors' money, the thing we were best at was indeed processing data. We built a pretty cool engine to populate all those data sets that we were hosting. And a lot of companies wanted to be able to do things like that privately. They didn't want to buy data sets from us. They wanted to access our software, and they wanted us to work with them to build similar platforms internally for them to use. So that became our business. We pivoted into technology and being a platform provider. And that was awesome. We did really well with that. We were good at it because we had done it before. We were fast. We had great software that we had built, and we were able to white label and turn around. And within a couple of years, we completely changed the trajectory of the company. I mean, I think on our first deals as a platform provider, we made more revenue than we made ever as a marketplace. And so that was very satisfying to finally have customers and have a pain point that we were solving. And that's ultimately how the company was acquired in 2013, based on that idea of being a platform provider for companies who wanted to make data projects. So I think, when Joe and I, after selling the company, hanging out for a bit and deciding we wanted to work together again to build something new, the number one question we were focused on was how do we make sure we build, the second company, not the first, right? There's so much cool technology, we're all tech heads, so we want to do something with technology. And there's so much of it, like blockchains, AI, drones, all this cool stuff. How do we make sure that whatever we pick has pain? There's real customers, that on day one we have revenues, and we're not stuck in this anti-pattern of building something because our investors and our engineers are excited about it, but no one's going to buy it from us. And if we're in that model, how can we figure out that we're like that as quick as possible so we can get out of it? That's kind of some of the reasons we had to go through this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of developers suffer from that, right? Just like shiny objects and building super cool things, then there's not a market for them necessarily. Yeah. So Yeah, so since you kind of were alluding to the founding of Unchained Capital, how did you, I mean, had you been in cryptocurrency for a period of time before you founded the company, or did you sort of get into it as you founded the company?
Yeah, I think, so before selling our InfoChimps in 2013, before the acquisition, Joe and I don't think either one of us really were in a position of having a lot of spare cash. I think Joe always had maybe an interest in being an investor. It was like oftentimes reading about it. I don't know that he had a huge amount of means. Neither did I. When we sold our company, it was the first time I think we had any real cash that we could get. I think we both bought condos, paid off some debts, like sort of tried to orient for the future, tried to learn about, we had a small win at age 25, 30, like how do we turn that into a successful retirement at age 65 or whatever, right? What does that process look like? Having to learn about it. And we also bought some Bitcoin. So it's like, I think if I had known more about money, if I had been more traditional or well-educated about it, I don't think I could have bought the Bitcoin. I would have been like, this is stupid. Like, it's not how money works. Like, but I was uneducated and I didn't know anything about how to build a successful portfolio for the future. And I was always sort of semi-fascinated by Bitcoin. I figured, hey man, I just made some money. I should blow some of it on this Bitcoin stuff. And in retrospect, of course, I'm super glad I did. Bitcoin has gone up tremendously since 2013, and I've held on to mine, and so I'm very happy. But the whole time, Joe and I were pretty suspicious, I think, for most of that time period about Bitcoin. We sometimes remark on it now that you have to be a pretty courageous person to get into Bitcoin in 2011 or 2012 or 2013 even. The industry was full of pirates and totally weird people. I wouldn't say bad people, but definitely weird people. And so for us, we could buy Bitcoin, but I don't think we were seriously considering starting a Bitcoin or crypto company. And cryptocurrency, by the way, at the time was just Bitcoin. There was nothing else, really. It was hard to imagine being a Bitcoin company for real, because what would you tell your parents? Like, what would you, what product would you sell? Like, would you go to jail? Like, there were so many questions that who had any idea? Why even bother? Better to do something more normal, something that we're quote unquote good at. Like, we're data guys, let's do data stuff. But in the years between, we sold the company, we sold InfoChimps in 2013, bought Bitcoin in 2013, we quit the company that acquired us, CSC, we quit working there about 2015 or so, and we started Unchained Capital in 2016. So that year, we really spent searching for what kind of company we wanted to build. Because we knew we wanted to work together again. We only wanted to do a startup here in Austin. It had a great run. Why not spin it again? But as I said, we looked for opportunities in data where we were like, we both just bought condos and was remodeling. So and anybody who's done that knows how painful that process is and how disorganized contractors are. And that's true of your home remodeling. It's also true of building a massive skyscraper. What about data for the construction industry, right? What about Amazon just bought Whole Foods, right? What about data for the grocery store industry? Because that's run very poorly as well. And all these cool data ideas. But secretly, we were just reading about Bitcoin, like the whole time. And it was fascinating. And I fall asleep on reading about Merkle trees and trying to mess with blockchain software. And at some point, you got to again just admit to yourself, what do you really like? There's what other people are doing, but there's what do you really like? And we really liked Bitcoin and blockchain. And I think the reason InfoChimps was bought in 2013 is because in 2013, everybody, all the big consulting companies, the big Fortune 500s were walking around needing a big data story. They needed, what's your story for this? Like, what's your data science team look like? And companies like ours looked very attractive as acquisition candidates. Like, we were strong teams. We would give them a really strong competency in this area that they had no strategy for. And even though we had made a lot of mistakes, we pivoted, and that was expensive from an equity perspective, and it put us behind some of our competitors. And it was our first company, and we hadn't done everything perfectly. Just the fact that we were a big data company that was good in 2013 meant that we had so much value. We had accrued it since 2008, working in that industry, every year growing. So it was kind of like in 2016 when we were contemplating what came next. Well, what is going to be that industry in 2020? What is the industry that in 2020 all the big companies that do? Because at this point, I suppose you never want to build a company to get acquired, but it's nice when you're a natural acquisition candidate. That's always nice. So what would be in 2020 the biggest industry to be in? And it fit the blockchain. It felt right. It felt by the time 2016 had come around, yeah, Bitcoin had collapsed in 2013, 2014 from $1,000 to like 200, but it hadn't died. It had sort of sat there crawling and surviving for like many, many more years, and that meant something. That meant there was certain erradicability to it, and by 2016 it felt a lot safer to get into the Bitcoin industry. Like, regulations had become a little bit more clear. The fact that Bitcoin hadn't done a crazy pump cycle in a while meant that a lot of the crazy people had gotten out of it and moved on to things like, you know, Ether and ICOs and various other projects. So Bitcoin almost started to feel conservative in some way, that people had sort of forgotten about it, and couldn't we add value to it somehow? Because by this time we held our Bitcoin for years, and we still wanted it, we still believed in it, but we didn't use it for anything. And so that sort of dawned on us. It's like, aha, okay, this is what we do. We love Bitcoin, we love crypto, let's do something in this industry. What should we do? Let's do something for guys like us, guys that like believe in this stuff, they hold this stuff for many years, but they're not doing anything with it. It's just digital mattress money. Let's make it better. So that started off our search for what business model could fit that hypothesis of underutilized cryptocurrency that people are hanging on to anyway, and that's kind of how we came to Unchained.
Yeah, so I guess we should go ahead and sort of give the quick pitch for what Unchained does. Yeah, just so that people understand, if they don't know already, what you guys do. You just explained the backstory for how you got there, but what's your first product? What do you offer?
Right, so that's the backstory, right? Like crypto, the background of crypto is a lot of people hold it speculatively for many years. They value it, but they don't get any value from it, at least in the short term. So Unchained is a company which provides financial services for such long-term holders of cryptocurrency. In particular, our first product is a loan product. So if you have a bunch of cryptocurrency, you don't want to sell it, you can get liquidity. You can collateralize it. You can give it to us, we'll give you dollars, and you pay an interest rate. It's a loan. It's very similar to a home equity line of credit or a securities-backed loan from your brokerage or something like that. It's very, very comparable financial structure, asset-based lending. The radical thing that we do is we consider cryptocurrencies to be real assets. That's not something your bank would do, but it's something we do. So in a nutshell, what we're allowing cryptocurrency holders to do is get some value today. Buy a house. It's our number one use case, by the way, for our borrowers. Buy a house, make an investment, fix up your kitchen, but don't sell your Bitcoin to do it. And our interest rates are pretty high. But the market can bear them because Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have grown by such tremendous percentages on average year after year that even our relatively high interest rates make sense. If you can hang on to this, soaring asset class, instead of having to sell it, it's a good move. So that's kind of what we're able to let our borrowers do.
And the taxes too are a problem, right? Because if you just cash out of the market and you get hit with a bunch of taxes, but
that's right.
With lending, there are no taxes in the traditional sense because you still own it.
That's correct. We're not taking possession of it.
Yeah.
We have a lien against it, and you have debt, and then there's interest payments. So you're right. You don't have to pay capital gains taxes when you work with us, which is another cost for it. If you were just to sell it, not only are you surrendering your future gains, you're also having to pay capital gains taxes in the year in which you sold your cryptocurrency. For a lot of folks, that's pretty tremendous. If you bought Bitcoin at $1 a coin or $10 a coin, and it's almost $10,000 a coin, that's a lot of capital gains tax that you want to have to pay. The cost basis is so low.
Right. And you guys have there's three parties involved, right? There's the borrower, and then there's the folks who have the money, and then you guys kind of mediate between those two.
Yeah, that's right. We are a loan originator and servicer, and we're also increasingly trying to become a custodian in the legal sense of that word. We certainly custody the coins today. So the borrower comes to us and they ask for a loan, we evaluate them, we do KYC AML, so like your customer, anti-money laundering, who are you? Are you on any government watch lists? Is it reasonable that you would have come across this crypto in the way that you say you did? Where do you live? The basic checks that we need to do. And then you apply for a loan, you send us the collateral. If anybody has used cryptocurrency, you use your wallet, whatever you use to store your crypto, just use that, send it to us, it comes into our wallet, you can see it on the blockchain. We don't rehypothecate these funds, we don't lend you or Bitcoin to somebody else behind the scenes without telling you. It just kind of sits there the whole time and acts as collateral. And then as soon as enough collateral shows up in our wallet, we'll wire transfer you the amount of your loan, and then you just pay payments once a month. It's interest only. So another way to think about it is that you're renting a supply of dollars with your cryptocurrency as collateral, and then you pay for that privilege each month.
So it strikes me as I was listening to you, what is Bitcoin?
I think it's a global energy market. That's what I think it is.
What do you mean by that?
Like it's a cryptocurrency. It's a digital token that is scarce, artificially so. Kind of like some people compare it to airline miles for that reason. It's another example of a digitally scarce resource. But it's not a very fair comparison. Bitcoin is unique in the world in that it is a completely opt-in system. No one can make you use Bitcoin. You don't have to use it, but if you choose to use it, and choosing to use it essentially means you choose to value it. You decide that these stupid tokens that were made up are valuable. And that's a remarkable hallucination to convince yourself of. But if enough people share that hallucination, as they do about dollars, as they do about various other things in the world that we consider valuable, suddenly the system develops some legs. And in particular, what's exciting about Bitcoin is that the way it's designed, these magic tokens, as long as we all share the same hallucination, and there's some safeguards built in to help us share the same hallucination and not fork and split up the community. As long as we all agree, we have some pretty strong protections. Namely, no one can take away our Bitcoins from us. No one can censor our use of Bitcoins. They're not completely anonymous, but they're pseudo-anonymous, so we have a lot of privacy, a lot more than we might get perhaps with credit cards or PayPal or other online systems. And there's the connection to energy. The way that all this is delivered, like the method by which all these guarantees are made, is that it's a ledger or a shared book of tally or account that in order to change, we just make an agreement. Again, this is a shared hallucination. So via the software, we make an agreement that says if you would like to change the data set that we're all sharing, you have to spend energy to do it. And we have a mechanism by which we can account for how much energy you spent. And we have a marketplace built into Bitcoin that gets ever more expensive, so that as time goes on, more and more and more and more of the world's energy is used to change this data set. And the data set, of course, is just the balance of who has what Bitcoin. So it's a system of balance in which we all collaborate to make changes, and we collaborate by forcing ourselves to do work to make those changes. So it's like the security of the token and so the security of holding the token boils down to your belief that energy is scarce. And if energy is scarce, it's difficult to waste energy. If it's difficult to waste ever increasing amounts of energy, it's difficult to change the consensus of the software, therefore your coins are secure. It's kind of a little bit circular in that way. By the way, why would you spend energy at all? Because you'll be paid in these made-up tokens that you've decided to value before you got into this whole scene.
And you're talking about mining and the way that these transactions are validated.
And I tried to avoid that word because it suggests all these things that, like pickaxes or something like that, which is not really what it's about. It's about energy.
Yeah.
And that's why I think of Bitcoin as a global energy market that essentially says energy is scarce, let's make money scarce, let's connect energy to money very concretely through mining, through proof of work.
What do you think about comparing it to gold?
Yeah, I think that's also a really good comparison, right? Like maybe you could argue that Bitcoins themselves are like digital gold, but mining is like, the energy market. But the mining market for Bitcoin is like the energy market. That's kind of a more precise way to put it.
What makes Bitcoin different than other cryptocurrencies, or is it special in any way?
Right. So I think it's the first one that makes it special on some level. And I think a lot of people see it and they come to it and they learn about it and they come back and they say, I figured out what's broken, here's my solution. And they come up with a new thing and this is what you should do instead. But eventually if you've been in and I did the same thing, it's a common reaction, like I'm not above it. It kind of becomes, the phrase that we like to use is blockchain, not Bitcoin. Like, everything I'm describing is this other technology called blockchain, which can be used inside of any token-based scheme, and so we can invent our own token-based scheme. We don't have to use Bitcoins in particular. We can use this blockchain practice, and we can add our own rules, and we can make it our own things. We can make Ethereum, we can make Litecoins, we can make all sorts of thousands of other alternative chains. Altcoins is what Bitcoin maximalists, to introduce another vocabulary word. That's what someone might call these alternatives to Bitcoin. I think after a while, if you've been in the community for a while and you're not too concerned with backing up your portfolio or anything like this, if you approach it, I think even handily, it sort of gets to the point where you realize that none of the things that are alternatives are really impossible to achieve in Bitcoin, that eventually Bitcoin could do all those things. So given that it has such a first mover advantage and has such name brand recognition, it's kind of got a lot of marketing advantages, and the technology edges or differences that a lot of these alternative chains have can be absorbed into Bitcoin. You start to realize that. You also start to realize that sometimes you don't want those things. That fancy feature that you think is, that one chain's advocates think is really cool, is unnecessary. The central mission of Bitcoin is to change the nature of money by coupling it directly to energy, and thereby changing a lot of the way governments and other large institutions fundamentally work and the kinds of freedoms they have in their ability to manufacture resources for themselves. And maybe you don't need that feature in order to build this thing. And by adding it, you've complexified the entire process. You've made it less secure. You've made it more likely that some bug will occur, and therefore, catastrophically, the money supply will be broken. And so you start to get conservative, and you're like, well, one, if we needed it, we could build it into Bitcoin, and two, we don't need it. And then finally, I would say that the most remarkable aspect of Bitcoin is its genesis, the situation of Satoshi, who is this mysterious person or persons, man, woman, group, no one knows, who came up with the idea of blockchains, released the software, which was Bitcoin, became a millionaire, eventually a billionaire, quit, left, never spent their coins, never threw their weight around to try and influence other people's opinions, leaving Bitcoin in this weird position of having really no leader. There's no one person or entity that Bitcoiners look to as their boss or leader, or even informally. Bitcoin is already so factionalized that there's no one person to take out, no one group that governments can point at and they say controls it. That's actually been very helpful to Bitcoin from a regulations perspective, that it's viewed as property and not a security, because there's no company associated with Bitcoin that really anybody can name. And so it can't be a security, therefore it's not dependent on some fixed group of people's efforts. It's more like digital gold, which no one is in control of. And that's, again, kind of unique. No other blockchain-based assets have that distinction, at least in US law as far as I'm aware. There's still some discussion over whether other things should be called securities or not. So sometimes, as it's by the Bitcoin religious, you would refer to this story as the Immaculate Conception, right? The creation of Bitcoin without really a creator, or at least in the case of Satoshi, with an anonymous and absent creator. And so that's kind of a remarkable historical circumstance. And I think every other chain that has been built, the people who built it are still around. They still own a large fraction of the coins in the chain. They've been mostly unable to extricate themselves from development in the chain, and in many cases that's nice because you get a lot of momentum, you get a lot of fast development, you get a lot of change and new code because you've got these individuals very, like Flip and Joe and I, like obsessively working on their app and getting a lot of stuff done. But I sometimes think that it would be better for it to be immaculate, for there to be no one to come after when it inevitably causes problems, as Bitcoin has when it's grown.
Mm-hmm. The other day you were tweeting about The Once and Future King, which was it a book by T.H. White?
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of it before, but you were thinking about it as it relates to cryptocurrency and blockchains.
That's really the same point.
What is it? Can you walk us through really quickly, what your insights were there, or how you tied it to cryptocurrencies today?
It is kind of the same theme, where The Once and Future King is the story, the sort of, I guess, reimagined story of Merlin helping King Arthur become an ideal and just ruler. And Merlin lives backwards through time, so he's like an expert. He knows about nuclear war and Hitler and all the horrible things of the modern era. And he's going back in time and he's trying to educate Arthur to be perfect and to be moral and just. And it's a tragedy, actually, because Arthur is moral and just, and he's the most moral character in the book, and he tries his best to build the most fair and equitable kingdom he can. But it crumbles because why? Because he's one man, and he has friends and he has principles, and they can be subverted, and nefarious and petty folk around him who desire power and don't really care about his principles are able to corrupt his kingdom of Camelot by corrupting his friends, by corrupting their principles. that no man can be as strong as an idea. That's kind of like a V for Vendetta thing too, right? Where individuals are always susceptible to more criticism than ideas, because individuals are imperfect. And because Arthur was, though just and moral and fair, ultimately an individual who loved other imperfect individuals, his kingdom crumbles through manipulation and deception and so on. And the book is meant to be optimistic. Arthur is the once and future king, after all. And I think reading it at the time, like as a young boy, I sort of thought the future version of that was, some particularly moral person of our era, right? Like someone that we could all look up to as like the modern version of the best and just amongst us. But I think what's cool about Bitcoin and Satoshi and leaderless systems or rules without rulers is that you can try to build Camelot, but without Arthur. That you can declare these to be the rules that we all have to follow, and we can elect through our own behavior to follow these rules and keep ourselves in check. And really, Bitcoin has a lot of rules. It has a lot of laws that the protocol enforces that we're all forced to follow. That's I shouldn't say we're not forced to follow, that we all choose to follow by downloading the software. We're not coerced, we're incentivized. And yet in the particular case of Bitcoin, there's no Arthur. There's no one person, at least since Satoshi has left and made it clear that they don't want to be known, there's no one to point at as a leader. And I think that's extremely powerful, that we're left with just building Camelot around ourselves. And there's no one person that the news media can take down, or whose personal or private life can reflect poorly on the community as a whole. We're sort of left to our own devices. Bitcoin's got to succeed now because of all of us.
So what do you think some of the social and political ramifications are of Bitcoin and blockchain looking forward? I know you like to take kind of like a longer view, but like where do you think this is going?
So some of the early articles that we put out talk about the many perspectives that you need in order to be able to think sensibly about blockchains. I definitely come at it from the technical side of that discussion. So, computer science, distributed systems, cryptography, like that. Those are the things I feel very comfortable with. But Bitcoin and blockchains are not technologies just. They are technological, but they are social movements just as much as they are technologies. And I think to understand and evaluate them, you need to understand politics and economics and sociology and psychology and anthropology, because those are also aspects of what's happening here. And on some level, you can think of Bitcoin or blockchains as really the first political technology to ever exist. That we've had communications technology, we've had manufacturing technology, we've had computing technology, weapons technology, all these sorts of activities that humans do. We've developed technology to support them and to give us better abilities and greater strengths. But we've never had political technology. We've had politics as usual, using massively more powerful communications technology, and that leads to a lot of issues, I think, as everyone is probably aware of in this and most recent as well as prior elections. The money formula for politics, that he who has the most power, has the most communications, has the most ad time. Politics, like the first technology for politics, which is to say a technological system which was designed to make that political process itself better or have more alacrity. That's Bitcoin. And it's about money on some level, but money is ultimately a form of political representation in a lot of ways. And so by rewriting what money is, rewriting how money works, Bitcoin is fundamentally making a political statement about what it believes money should be and what it believes, therefore, politics and discourse should be. Like the very first Bitcoin block to ever exist, there's a message from Satoshi, presumably embedded in there, which talks about bank bailouts. And it clips a line from a UK newspaper about governments bailing out banks. And here I am building my own money, right? So it's very much a statement about, in Satoshi's view and in the view of a lot of people who support Bitcoin, that sort of, that desire by, let's say, that Keynesian desire to have a strong state that is capable of printing more money because it decides the money should be squishy and it decides who should win and who should lose in a given instance. that's not a right way to build a society. And again, since I come from more the technology side, I wish I had a stronger background in traditional macroeconomics or sociology or history to be able to more eloquently talk about some of this. But it feels to me that I can't say the world will be better if things like Bitcoin become the new standard, but it will be different. And I think eventually, the reason I support it is because I think as a political technology, we need to start using it. And what if it's not Bitcoin? I kind of don't care. Something else may replace it. But we need to start learning how to wield these political technologies to govern ourselves. And I think that starts with money, but eventually it grows to things like political representation, human identity, like social networking, trade, possessions, ownership, voting, military service. A lot of those systems, which right now are really, let's be honest, they're databases. They're databases and trust and human meat space access control. I think a lot of those systems will be changed by the kinds of rules without rulers approach that things like Bitcoin have already shown can make sense with just money. I think that same approach will make sense in those other fields as well. So yeah, and I think this changes everything.
That's a great place to end it. Let's just say thank you to Drew for sharing with us. I want to give you guys a chance. You've been sitting there quietly. I get a chance to talk to him and ask him questions. We have our special microphone here that hopefully is on. You can tap on it and see if it works. If it's not working, then let me see.
We can share this one. Maybe we can pass around the other guy.
Yeah, that will work. You'll hold on to that. We'll just use this. Hopefully it'll last out into the room. Just don't throw this one. Do you have a question?
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
Why do you think Satoshi left? Do you think it was like for the reasons you outlined for the benefits of a decentralized thing? And also, do you think Satoshi's reason for building blockchain matters? Or do you think it's kind of the people who are now reason for building Bitcoin matters? Or do you think the people who own it now get to kind of decide for themselves what it means and how it's going to work in the world?
Well, I'll answer them backwards. I think to do the second one first, yeah, I don't think Satoshi matters at all. Like, Satoshi was a thing that happened. He, she, or they left and surrendered most of their influence. And in theory, they may have keys to the coins that they never spent. And if they have that power, man, wow, that's crazy. My friend Michael here in Austin, he spoke at an event like this a few weeks ago, and he made a good point that he almost wishes Satoshi would have burned their coins, so to speak, which is to say, perform a transaction in which they don't send the coins anywhere, but they prevent them from ever being sent again. So just sort of essentially destroy them, leave them in the fabric of the blockchain, but destroyed, to sort of really prove that they're never going to use them again. But my suspicion is that Satoshi's keys are gone. I can't imagine some group or human or entity that is worth all those tens of billions of dollars and seeks to capitalize on none of it and has spent none of it. Because if it's not clear, we would see those coins move. There's a population of coins that's fairly certain are Satoshis. If they were to be spent, people would know about it. They've never been spent. And that's remarkable to me. So I feel like they're gone. I feel like it's every year that goes by, those coins decouple from the rest of Bitcoin, become older and older and older, and are less and less likely to ever be used again. So I don't think Satoshi matters anymore at all. I don't think Satoshi's white paper matters at all. I think Bitcoin it's on us to make it successful. We can't. I think the greatest thing that Satoshi did was to leave and force us to not look to an authoritarian leader for our opinions, but to argue amongst ourselves and come up with what we think is the right decision, and not force it on each other, but by building software, create targets for folks to opt into. Like the Bitcoin fork, which happened last year, literally about almost exactly a year ago, there was one part of the community that really wanted something and another that didn't, and 2 versions of software were produced, and you could choose which one you wanted to run, and everyone mostly ran one and not the other. And why? Were they educated? Were they right? Who knows? But they weren't forced. And I think that's a remarkably civilized way to deal with disputes. And so we've had disputes like that. We're going to continue to have them. It's on us to figure out how we want Bitcoin to grow. Why did Satoshi leave? Its quote was, I have some other things going on right now, and I'm kind of like, what else do you have going on? That's like, so when Satoshi left, they were already a millionaire, certainly. Like with the number of coins with the number of Bitcoin we believe Satoshi to have, at the then price of those coins, Satoshi was already a millionaire, and was like, fuck it, I'm out. Like, I got other things going on. I gotta go watch Breaking Bad. I don't know what their plan was. But now they're a billionaire, and they've not done anything. So, multi-billionaire, they've not done anything with them. So, I think they left because they didn't want to associate themselves with the project. That I think, truthfully, Satoshi realized how subversive the project is, fundamentally. This is not like a new thing that we're going to buy tchotchkes with online, and it's going to be limited to that, but Goldman Sachs and the government still has all the same power and clout they've always had. If Bitcoin really turns into what it could turn into, so many things change. The nature of who has power and money and influence in the world will change, maybe not entirely, but significantly. And that's subversive. And that means anybody who was in charge of a project like this would have enemies. And furthermore, as we've discussed previously, would be a weak point. There's no person who's so perfect that trying to unseat the nature of money itself wouldn't cause their enemies to come after them and find some ammo, find some thing that they could hold against them to vilify the entire process. Like, God forbid Satoshi is like a bad, ugly dude with bad personal habits and hygiene or something like that, you know? Like, it's unlikely. Or God, what if they're a government rogue unit or something like this? Like, there's all sorts of explanations for who or what they are that are crazy and really don't matter. Because what matters is the idea. And once the idea is out there, we can choose or not choose to accept it and believe in it and run it. And everybody that runs a node or interacts with Bitcoin is opting in and saying, I like where you're going, Satoshi. I like your monetary policy. I like your software. I like the decisions you're forcing onto me. I support this. And that's remarkable. So I'm glad that they left, because I'm not interested in having discussions over, you know, were they a good person or not. I prefer to not know. Because also imagine in the early days how much Bitcoin may have been used for nefarious purposes. It's less used for those purposes today. It's still there somewhat, but no one wants to be like Time Magazine. Satoshi was on Time Magazine Man of the Year, right? Like Entity of the Year or whatever, some year. But imagine that same year there's articles about child porn and chattel slavery being powered by Bitcoin and fucking faces on the magazine, right? Like, no one wants to be in that position. Though I think Satoshi knew that whatever they were building would be used for horrific things like that at some point in its history. Why attach yourself to it and give yourself extra grief? Satoshi clearly wasn't he wasn't someone motivated by wealth. Let's put it that way. If they were someone motivated by wealth, they would have unspent their money, and they never have. So, I don't know. I think they knew what they were building and they wanted help because they couldn't see how one person's involvement could ever make it better.
So kind of taking a step back from Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and that whole realm, going back to more of the beginning of your story, you were going after a PhD, you were obviously highly motivated to go do that. Can you talk about the shift that you had to mentally take outside of just being, you know, extremely motivated, that you had to do from learning to be in academia to learning in entrepreneurship? What are those skills that you had to change that either are different or similar in between those two worlds?
I would say the stuff that's different is definitely what I appreciate. And I think I would have been quite happy to be an academic physicist. Many of my closest friends are still physicists to this day. Though, ironically, many of us are no longer practicing physicists. Most of us are data scientists, for sure. Very few of us actually made it. I'm 35 now. Very few of us made it at my age to being professors of physics or even on that track anymore. And those of us that did were the best. Like, we were the best at them. Like, even today, I look at my friends who actually are professors at like MIT or whatever, and I'm just like, I knew in freshman year, like, that was going to be you, right? Like, you were always the best of all of us. I was never the best. I was good, but never the best. And I think most of us who realize that we are only good and not the best became scientists. I didn't. I became an entrepreneur. Somewhere in there, I did a lot of data science. But I think the thing that what I saw that I liked better was, I mean, truthfully, if you're not the best, you don't get that cool job as a physicist that you thought you were headed for. You get a much more grind of a job, a lot more teaching responsibilities to service classes that you may appreciate, much less funding, much less opportunity to go to conferences, You can always climb back into that sector by doing truly brilliant work. But if you secretly begin to suspect that you're just a good or just a mediocre physicist, much better to leave the industry and do something else and get paid incredibly well. So I think as someone who realized they were probably better at learning physics than they were at truly doing new physics, I think I had to sort of internalize that and admit that to myself and then decide, would I rather just be mediocre or would I rather take a shot at something I could be really good at? And for me, entrepreneurship was something I think I can be really good at. And that was part of it. I would say there's some similarities though too. One of the things I think is the most similar is the concept of taste. Like scientists, in particular physicists, in particular theoretical physicists, have a strong, I think a big part of what makes them successful or top in their field is having good taste and choosing problems which superficially may seem very simple, but turn into deep insights. Feynman has a great story about he saw a kid at the cafeteria in Stanford or whatever, or in Caltech, spinning a plate, like throwing a dinner plate out and spinning it. But like the plate had like a little emblem on the rim on one side, and he expected to see the emblem like once every rotation, but he only saw it once every 2 rotations, and it had something to do with the mutation or whatever of the plate, and he spent days sleeplessly trying to figure out the fucking plate situation, and it turns out that that gave him an incredible insight into the nature of spin of the electron, which is like spin 1/2, and it has some similar property that you only see it every 2nd rotation, and it's people like that, right? Like, why did his taste tell him that as one of the greatest living physicists, he should spend 3 days thinking about the plate? But it did, because like somewhere in there, his unspoken mind is like, this is the simple version of the hard problem you've been trying to solve for 10 years. And I think there's a lot of stories like that where physicists and mathematicians also, they cultivate taste in their students as well, and they sort of get them to try to understand what problems are sexy in the sense that they lead to more interesting results. I think that's true of entrepreneurs too, that entrepreneurs, especially really good ones, look at the incredible serial entrepreneurs like Jack Dorsey, who just comes up with amazing consumer application after application, and of course executes incredibly well. It's not that Feynman didn't execute or other physicists don't have to execute when they have good taste, but someone like Jack is able to find the right problem, and even if the consumer didn't tell them exactly what they wanted to build, like build the right version the first time around in such a way that it's just such good taste. How could you pick consecutively such good problems to go after? It's because you have good taste fundamentally. You see a small tiny thing as like, I want a microblogging platform, or you turn it into like Twitter, or you say like it's, merchant point of sale is easier and it becomes Square, which then by the way starts to impact Bitcoin. It's remarkable, and I think like physics, it's not something that's easy to just learn from a textbook. It's probably easiest to get from a mentor. And I think the mentorship network in entrepreneurism is not nearly as rigid as it is in academia. In academia, there's websites that catalog who was your advisor, who was their advisor, who was their advisor, going back to connecting to Newton and whatever else, right? Which is a cool feeling if you're a physicist to know that you're connected to Newton somehow. But so it's not nearly as rigid as that in entrepreneurism, but I think there is still a network, obviously, of mentorship, both casual and formal, through things like investment and VCs and incubators and so on. And taste kind of moves in channels there. Like there's definitely taste in Austin, which is different taste than is in San Francisco about what problems are interesting and sexy for entrepreneurs to go after, like which lead to like unicorns, which is I guess the equivalent of like insightful knowledge or whatever for a scientist. But I think that part's similar, and those who are the best entrepreneurs, oftentimes they can execute, of course, but they have that taste, they have that ability to go find what is the best problem and then consecutively find such problems and go after them. I don't know that I have taste. I think I'm developing taste, but I definitely think I picked good industries so far. Mostly because I'm always interested in I think what other nerds are interested in, so maybe I'm just gravitating. I don't know.
So my question is more financial. Oh, by the way, are you guys that success story that I think Josh used for the pitch practice?
Oh man, yeah,
that was you, right?
Monkey suit.
Yeah. Okay, I thought I recognized it. Yeah. So that was good. It was good. It was good. It was good. I guess it worked, right? So, my question though is because I'm in fundraising period right now. I guess seed funded. So my question is, when you guys were raising funds, what are some of the lessons you took from it, right? Like do's and don'ts that you would advise us to kind of look out for, and I guess also moving forward, some of the do's and don'ts that you don't want to do after you're funded, right? So.
I think we've been lucky. I've been lucky in my career to always have worked with incredible investors. I don't have any stories of like that investor really screwed me over and so on. It's part of the reason that having gone through a cycle of VC money and selling a company, I came back for more. Unchained is also investment funded. A lot of entrepreneurs who don't, I think, have a good experience with professional investment capital desperately avoid it and don't want to go back. I was okay with going back because I'm comfortable with the idea that I can build something that will find value even in a model like this. And it is true that if you take investment capital, you're kind of saying I'm going to be big. Like you can't be small at that point and expect to have any return left for yourself, much less your employees or anything like that. You have to go big. But I'm comfortable going big. I know that I can. And I also realize that the kinds of problems I get interested in are problems that are difficult to bootstrap. It would be difficult to bootstrap my company. My company needed investment, both this time around and last time around. I could have chosen to do a different company. I could have had different tastes and decided that I wanted to solve a different problem, which gave me more control over my funding situation and didn't require going out for investment. But I didn't. This is the taste that I've had. So I think maybe that's the first piece of advice is know yourself. If you're trying to build a business and you want control and you want to not feel like other people's money is causing you to do things, don't take the money. Find a way, like change your own ambition, change your taste so that you don't need that. But conversely, if you are doing it and you feel like the path forward for you is I need to go raise money, be sure you know why, right? Like I'm doing it because I can afford to do it in the sense of my business is large enough that it makes sense for me to take on this model and that I'm not going to be regretful of having raised this money years from now when it comes to acquisition time or to partnership time or to merger time because I haven't put myself into a box that I can't get out of. So I think that's like the first question. And then second, just like, don't let someone's laugh about like, don't work with people that you wouldn't like spend a night with in a hotel room with like 2 double beds, you know what I mean? Like that's a stupendously awkward thing to contemplate with an investor. Or even with an employee, right? Like, gender makes this more complicated, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? If they're like, oh, I couldn't imagine them in pajamas and socks, like, don't work with them. Like, that's like, if they're so weird, or they're so harsh, or they're so, they make you uncomfortable, or whatever, like, don't work with them. Like, there are other people out there that you should be able to get money from, and if you're being forced into a position where you're accepting money and obligation, therefore, with someone that you're fundamentally uncomfortable hanging out with, because you do a lot of hanging out, and it's not always going to be fun. Like there's going to be times when your business is failing and you'll need them to, you can't be afraid of them. They can't be like the teacher, I need to do your homework. They can't be like, your dad and it's the first time you're drunk and you just came home and he's like, I'm so disappointed in you. It can't be that. It needs to be like, hey, I get it. Like things fail, like how do we fix this together? They need to be a partner. And they need to be someone you can view as a partner. And so sometimes you can't see them in socks and pajamas, it's like not going to work. That's like maybe another thing. And again, I've been lucky because like all our investors have been people like that. They've been, especially with InfoShips that went through a pivot and went through a lot of time of uncertainty and we weren't really sure whether we were going to save the company, so to speak, right? Like, did we essentially burn too much money on this business model to be able to recover and have a successful company, much less an exit on a second business model? It wasn't clear, but thank God our investors stuck with us. And truthfully, investors can't stick with you forever. They're also running a business. So on some level, they're always balancing their desire to see a project finish with the idea of throwing bad money after good, or excuse me, good money after bad. So you want people that will stick with you, but also prompt you, motivate you, and like don't want to be afraid of them, but you don't want them to be unable to criticize you and to give you kind of a kick in the ass when you need it. So I like having investors probably for that reason, like the network that you get and you get this partner that has a different perspective on your business than you do. That's just should be ideally just as incentivized for it to succeed as you are, but the way that they can affect it is very different, and the perspective they have is different, and that's valuable. So we just had a board meeting this week. Super valuable to have a bunch of really smart, incentivized people show up who haven't been there every single day, but who have been roughly in sync with us, and then they're finally getting like the details on everything that's been happening, and they're commiserating with us about our failures, and they're congratulating us on the stuff that we're doing well, and they're challenging us, hey, you said that you would have this, but you don't have it, like, where is it? It's sometimes nice to have that, but it's because there's mutual respect. It doesn't turn into like, we're afraid of them, and we're dreading the board meeting, and we're dreading the criticism. Like, we're eager for it, like, we're hungry for that criticism because they're the right partners. So.
Hey, Dhruv and Arun. My background is one of financial and management accounting and MBA. For a very moderately mathematically and statistically trained person like me, I work in the finance and accounting function with Apple. How do I start taking baby steps in understanding blockchain? Say I can watch 100 hours of YouTube videos and keep reading, but I'll be just regurgitating what somebody else told. To extent I can memorize something, right? Is there a way I can participate in this? I am not a technical person like you. There are many people offering courses, but I don't know where to start. So how can a common man like me start participating in blockchain and also apply that on my job? Any advice if it's in the realm of things?
Wow. Okay. So I kind of do this sort of three separate questions, maybe. One, like, what's the right way to understand blockchains? I think the best thing to realize is that it is actually really hard. It's very hard, and it's not hard like multiplying two really large numbers, right? It's not hard like remembering a long list of letters or something. It's hard like evolution is hard, right? Like to understand the principle of evolution is something I would hope most of us in this room kind of feel like comfortable with. The basic idea, genes, survival of the fittest, gradual change of the species. There are a lot of things like group selection which we might argue over because they're not obvious based on the axioms or the basic like rules of how evolution may work. There are many of the implementation and details, like how did the eye evolve, and like all these discussions that frankly evolutionists and anti-evolutionists can still have to this day. There's a lot of minutiae like that, but the core idea is, I think hopefully for most people in this room who grew up with a scientific education, something we've accepted. But if you think about it, it's a remarkable thing to accept. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, we came from monkeys? It's like ridiculous. Like, it's easy for us because we're so enmeshed in all the constituent sciences. We know about genetics. We know that one man and one woman can have sex one time, and two cells can combine, and that can create a whole new life. And so the idea that one of those cells is one little tiny part that changed in some way, we can accept that. But without all that necessary framework of how all that stuff works, it's very hard to just say, oh, the game needs to mutate, and that causes inherent variation, which then causes which then is the strata upon which survival of the fittest operates in order to change the species. There's so much like implicit knowledge in the ability to evaluate that state and to see it as reasonable. So when someone says proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions, which by the way I think is the heart of blockchain, you can explain how does proof of work secure Bitcoin transactions. That requires understanding cryptography, energy, human incentives, the nature of money, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very loaded phrase, but kind of like survival of the fittest acts upon variations in the population to change the species over time. It's a short sentence which has so many implications and requires so much depth of understanding in its constituent areas to be able to connect together. So on some level, don't feel like no one should feel stupid for not immediately understanding what blockchain is. And you're right that the first thing you should feel is like, I feel like I'm just repeating what you said without understanding it, because that's what happens for the first months of learning about something like this. Because again, there's no one fact that's hard. The hard part is there's so many new things to learn about because so few people are experts in cryptography, but also sociology and also monetary policy and also distributed systems, right? It's extremely difficult to bridge all those disciplines. And when someone says, okay, here's what proof of work is, here's what Bitcoin is, here's what the transactions are, proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions. Do you see it? Oh, of course I see it. You lost me way back when at proof of work. Well, you lost me at public key. What the fuck is a public key? So I would say just keep at it, right? Like, be aware that you're going to be confused. But eventually, if you can start to internalize some of the ingredients, like asymmetric cryptography, public-private keys, why is consensus without a leader difficult in systems like the Byzantine generals problem, those are the computer science things, and then like, why is money valuable? Why do people think money is real? Like, what was money before we had this money? What about wampum and shells? And you can read like, Nick Szabo and like all the early writers and some of that stuff, the cypherpunks. If you can do all that homework, then eventually there will come a point when you will read like proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions, and you're like, yes, of course, I finally see how that makes sense. And then at that point, you get blockchains, and then it's like a plateau. As soon as you reach that point, like you can see over it, and now there's all this other stuff you can now start to learn about. I kind of think that too many people never get to that point. They just keep repeating stuff they don't understand, and then they buy stuff they don't understand, and they get involved in projects that they don't understand, and it just goes on forever. And they have no clothes on, because they can't actually themselves answer that question. They could not explain to my satisfaction how proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions. So at the risk of turning that into some vapid mantra, like I would say, write that phrase down. How does proof of work secure Bitcoin transactions? And just look at it periodically and decide whether you can explain that to yourself to your satisfaction. And expect it to take a little while. What do you do once you can answer the question? How do you use it at work? Where do you work, Apple?
The finance function.
You may need to get a different job, bro. And that's okay. That's all right. I really, truthfully, Eric and I were talking about this earlier. I don't see a lot of corporations being able to actually use the blockchain anytime soon. I mean, you have some like payment use cases, like if you work at Square instead of Apple, right? Like Square has a pretty cool program right now around Bitcoin, and they need to support Bitcoin, and they're committed to making Bitcoin one of their payment channels. So, okay, if you're really close to the payment world, you're really close to the world of computing, like and hash functions or cryptography, maybe you can use Bitcoin at work or blockchains at work. But I would suspect almost all of us who are working at companies that started before blockchains cannot use it at work. And if we want to work in the field, we should just admit that to ourselves and go work in the field, right? And like find a job at my company or at others and say that I came here because I really believe blockchains are the thing for us to be focused on. Eventually, and which is not to say that Apple is not working on blockchains. I'm sure that they're working on them. There's many projects, but I'm very dubious that any of those projects will amount to very much, because in many ways, a blockchain is kind of like open source software. It's a thing that goes against the nature of the corporation, and that maybe today's corporations are pretty okay with large parts of open source software, but rewind a little bit, like that was a crazy idea that we'll write code and we'll give it away to people. Like, how does that make us better? That's the opposite of what a company should do. A company should have intellectual property. It takes a certain synthesized attitude to appreciate how open source software helps a company. And I think it's the same idea now. Why would we give up control to a bunch of workers that don't directly work for the company, who are compensated indirectly by a token? And by the way, it's completely opt-in. We can't force them to do anything. We don't like that. That doesn't sound like the thing a corporation wants. Corporations want control. They want surety. They want the ability to modify stuff. They want to have records on you. They don't want the kinds of freedoms that blockchains often provide their users and participants. So they get into blockchains and then they negate those fundamental properties. They build Ripple, right? They build other things that fundamentally just really aren't blockchains. They're just blockchain. They're dressed up things to look like blockchains, and that will go on for many more years. But if you can answer the question of how proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions, and you feel good about your answer, and you want to keep thinking that way, you may have to go find a job that's native in the industry and then just live it.
Sure, the thing is already in the mind of proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions.
You caught the bug, huh? It is like a rabbit hole. I would say that's another thing that almost all of us who've done this experience. Like once you can answer the question, you're like, oh my God, there's so much now to learn, and then you lose it for a couple of months and you go down the rabbit hole.
So the question stemmed mainly because many recognized universities are now offering courses for $3,000, saying bankers, accountants. Then you are like, in 2 months, should I pay $3,000 and take up the course? What will happen after that, right?
Or just, you can also be honest with yourself. If your goal is to be able to put it on a resume so that you can get a slightly higher pay bump and move up in the job, like that's a perfectly reasonable and good goal, and you can do it. If your goal is to I really want to understand this field and build things in the field, that's very difficult. And I think that second goal is hard to achieve in today's large corporations. Maybe in 10 years, once we've had a cycle of people who get blockchains and then are now inside the corporation and then using it natively, then I can start to see it making sense. But I would say, unless you're close to payments, it's hard to do it. Sorry, there's someone else at the mic.
Thanks again for doing this. My question has to do with kind of like info chips and that thing that you talked about, being obsessed with a shiny piece of technology and not focusing on kind of the customer pain and figuring that out and that being a learning. I was kind of wondering, the second time around, or even when you were at InfoChimps and figured that out, was there something that changed in your process? Is there something that changed in your process for Unchained that allowed you to figure out that pain quicker? And two, after kind of participating in that process, is there a particular outcome or some evidence that you can say that you have at a certain point in building those companies where you can say that you've found that pain or you've found that product market fit?
I think finding pain requires talking to customers. I think engineers too often like to pretend that they already understand the customer because like, oh, I have the same problem, or like I have the same kind of dog, or like I too have this, thing going on. So I don't need to talk to customers. I can build the product directly. And that's, I think, the way we approached a lot of our product decisions at InfoChimps when we were first starting. Hey, we're data guys. We work with data all the time. No one knows better than us how to build a marketplace to connect other people to data. Why should we be spending tons of time talking to our customers and so on? We wouldn't even know who our customers were. If you asked me, like, who do you think are your customers? I would have said, people who like to buy data. Who are those people? Like, people with money who need data. Like, I had very little more. I couldn't tell you they look like this. They work at these industries. They're like, they have these job titles. This is their budget. They shop with credit cards versus they'll have to invoice them. I didn't know any of those things because, truthfully, I wasn't really selling to a market. I was just identifying the kind of thing one could do and hoping that there existed a market for it, and then designing secretly what I wanted. Except I would never have paid because I didn't have any money. And that's exactly what wound up getting built, is the kind of thing that I would have loved to use, but no one would pay for, because everyone like me also was like, oh, this is really cool, I'd love to use this. I'm not going to pay you for it though. Like that's what we wound up building, right? Only when we started talking to our customers and they were like, finding more data is not really a problem for me. Like, I can't handle the data I've already got. Can you solve that problem? Like, I'll pay you for that. And I was like, oh, really? Okay, well, that's not interesting to me, but okay, that's what you'll pay me for? Okay, let's better get interested in it. Let's figure this one out. And I think with Unchained, I didn't want to do that. And Joe and I think, did a really good job, a better job, maybe, saying, well, who is the customer of our product? And it was people like us, right? So, but that didn't mean that therefore we didn't have to talk to them. I think this time around we were like, okay, people like us, what is that? People who hold Bitcoin for long periods of time and tend not to spend it. Let's find those people. So we came up with an actual customer interview template, like many questions, like on all sorts of topics around this theme, and we started interviewing them. We started like, hey, do you know anybody who has a lot of Bitcoin? Like anybody who has more than $10,000 of Bitcoin, we want to talk to them. And we just made a list of those people and started reaching out. Like, well, what are your problems? What is easy? What's hard? Like, what do you think is going to happen next? Like, if we built this, would you pay us for it? Like, a very crucial question, which we never really asked at InfoChimps in the early days. We never really went to Apple and said, hey, if we build a website that any of your engineers can log on to and just do this, how much would you pay us in site licenses? We never bothered to ask. We assumed if we made it good enough, of course they'd show up. And that was a huge mistake. With Unchained, we asked. We said, out of all the things we could build, loans, derivative contracts, fixed income tools, security things, like where do you feel like the biggest lack, the biggest need? And that's how we kind of oriented on loans and lending as like, hey, if you're a person who has a ton of Bitcoin, you might have a regular job, you might have a regular salary, not a lot of savings in dollars, but you're really rich in Bitcoin. What a weird person you are. Like, what a unique set of problems you have. Turns out you will pay like this for a loan, because why haven't you just sold all your Bitcoin and turned it into cash? Because you're irrational and you think it's going to go up more. You refuse to do it, so you can't do the most obvious thing. If we show up and we say, hey, you don't have to sell your Bitcoin, and we can get you the money you need to make that down payment on the house that you'd like to buy, you'll work with us. And finding those people and asking them, well, how much would you pay? Like, what aspects of that service would make you trust it more? What aspects would make you trust it less? And just writing all those things down, and then 6 months later, building exactly that thing turns out to be a really good way to get customers on your first day.
And did you do that process for Unchained before you raised?
Yeah. We did it before we raised, and then we thought we could raise on having done the diligence. Because we're like, oh, we're fancy pants guys. We sold a company. Like, here's our problem statement. Here's all our customer interviews. Like, give me the money. I'm going to build the thing. They're going to buy it. It's going to be great. And I think what we found is maybe if this had been data or like databases or something more normal that like I was already known for being really good at, maybe we could have done it that way. But what we found is that when we went to VCs who knew us well and investors who knew us well, they didn't know Bitcoin. And they were like, this is really cool. Like, well, why do you guys want to work in Bitcoin? It's so weird, you know, like, you're data guys, don't do that, do this other thing. And then when we went to Bitcoin investors, they were like, I really like this idea, but who the fuck are you guys? You know, I don't know you. Like, why should I trust you? And so we were in this situation where some groups of investors thought we were great entrepreneurs and they would love to back us, but they thought that we lost our minds by working in Bitcoin. Ironically, many of those investors are now big Bitcoin crypto enthusiasts, so that's cool. I'm glad they caught up. And then there was this total other group that was like, we love your idea, but we don't know you. And so we were left in the situation of maybe we should just build it. And I think since we had a win from InfoChimps, we were actually in a position where we could hire a few people, we could do some development, we could pay for it. We actually gave the first loans just ourselves out of just our own personal bank accounts, which was totally crazy. But we were in a position to start that way, which we weren't in last time. So I think I'm glad that we had that ability because it let us actually build the product. We didn't raise money, any external money, until we already had like a bunch of loans out and we already had some customers, we had our site up, and then we were fairly quickly actually able to raise like a little bit of a debt round, and then we raised a seed round in May. That's been really nice. So it's definitely true that the more you have built and the more confident you are and the better your product is, and then the more customers you have, the easier it becomes to then raise money, which is of course the catch-22 of the entire problem. I don't fail to appreciate that.
So you had talked before about, and I think you kind of touched on it, but you didn't really like get in depth into it. But and kind of you sporadically have been talking about it this whole time. But if you talk to anybody for any length of time about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, you start to see that they have fundamental differences in how they view society and how they view groups of people.
Radical.
and you really don't see these views outside these specific groups of people that are investing within Bitcoin and within crypto. What are some of those beliefs that you hold, and can you touch on specifically why you hold those beliefs?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. It's difficult to, you can get into crypto in like 2 or 3 ways. You can get into it thinking that like, oh, I'm just here for money. Like I don't actually care about like what people believe. They're willing to pay X for it. They're willing to pay X times 2. Like I'll get into that deal. I don't care. And I think there are people who are like that. I think there are people who talk a big game about what they believe or think values that they hold that actually don't hold those values or beliefs and just recognize that it's good signaling and helps them play the money game. And that's totally fine. That's a legitimate way to be. That's just trading. That's totally a fair thing to be. And I think there's also people that come in as technologists who are like, I think this technology is great because cryptography, because transparency, and I think those people are misunderstanding. Like it's not technology as far as I can tell. Like, and there's some cool examples of that which we can get into, but if you don't value the token, the system doesn't work. Like it cannot work without you valuing the tokens. There has to be some social basis for why the tokens are valuable. Some group of people must decide they're valuable, or it just doesn't work. And so I think it's fine to be a trader. I think it's a bit diluted to pretend that it's just technology. But there is, I think, people like me who get into it and they recognize that, yeah, there's tech here, and yeah, there's money, but fundamentally, like, this only works if we all believe it works, which means there's a social element to it. And why? The why of that is fascinating. When I first heard about Bitcoin, it was 2011, and I was, given my background, actually very well prepared to understand how proof of work secures Bitcoin transactions. And I think I got it the first time it was explained to me. But then my immediate reaction was, this is dumb. Like I understand what it does. It's cool to have solved the double spend problem digitally, but who cares? Like who wants this? Who wants your fake money? Like why would anybody want this at all? It's done. That was my attitude. Like what a smart, like mathematics, right? What a useless, esoteric, fascinating problem that no one has. But Bitcoin was also worth less than $1 at that time. This was like 2011. And then I heard about it again later in 2013, and it was worth hundreds of dollars. And to me, like, one, there's like, oh wow, I heard about it so long ago. If I had bought some, I would have made this tremendous gains. Like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But bigger than that, it was like, how can it be worth hundreds of dollars? Like, who is giving it that basis? It cannot be, in the intervening 2 years, a bunch of other crypto nerd, like cryptography and math and computer science people, all like me, have appreciated like the coolness of this solution and want to collect it because they think it's interesting. That can't be the reason. It must be there's some group of humans for whom this has become real. Like this thing that I thought was stupid, it's become real for them somehow. Like they've decided that it's real. And who are those humans? I don't know. Like criminals probably. Honestly, people who had issues moving funds across countries. The situation in Venezuela was not nearly as dire back then, but like maybe there were people who worried about the sanctity of their money supply. People talked about Cyprus. There was a big event in Cyprus in the mid-2010s about banks not letting people take out more than a couple $100s a day. So episodes like that maybe fueled part of it, but just the realization that there were enough people in the world to have given Bitcoin a price of a couple $100 like floored me. I never thought it would even become that successful. And at some level, the journey from $0 to $1 million a coin, the most miraculous part is that first $100. Like that's crazy to me. How could that ever happen? Because anybody who believed it was valuable, I could just fork it and I could just make my own version. Why isn't mine valuable? You know, and like those arguments stop making sense after a while once the system gets large enough. But in the early days, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to believe. Why would you ever? The person who bought it at like 200, I get, because I was in that cohort of buyers. The person who bought it at $2, I don't understand. Because like, what a risk you took. How did you know there'd be a buyer at $3 or at $4, right? At least buying at 200, I could be sure that someone will buy at 202, right? That seemed reasonable. But I don't know. Yeah, so the early days was shocking to me. But since accepting that some people view it as actual money, I started to view it as actual money. And part of it is I own some, and I'm obviously incentivized for other people to view it as actual money, so that evangelist aspect certainly exists. I find myself evangelizing more than I'd like to admit, perhaps. But more than that, it does cause you to question like what your actual other money is made of, which I never did. Like even having heard of Bitcoin in 2011, it never led me to ask, well, how do dollars work? I never asked that question. I didn't have enough dollars to care how they worked. I just needed them to keep working for another 2 weeks until I got paid again. It was only after selling the company and making enough dollars where I could like pause and like think about what I had and like reflect a little bit, and I bought some Bitcoin, and I was like, well, Bitcoin works like this, how the dollar, oh my god, the dollars work like arguably in a worse way than the Bitcoin works, and you start to like dig into money supplies and how money is multiplied and who's in charge of that, and you start to maybe view things like inflation as a tax that is not voted upon, and you start to say libertarian things like that, and I don't like libertarian politics, and I think in a lot of other ways, I don't like labeling myself as any particular political party, frankly, or anything like that. But Bitcoin is radicalizing. It definitely makes you question why you're so. The assumption is, of course, you trust third parties in the world, because how could you ever do things without trusting third parties? But Bitcoin shows you a way to do things without trusting third parties, and it's a pretty shitty, inefficient, slow, ponderous, heavy, inelegant way at times, but it does work. And suddenly you're just like, that is radicalizing. That opens you up to the idea that, well, why do we need banks? Why do we need the DMV? Why do we need all these institutions that suddenly exist? And then you start to get a little libertarian, like not in the, screw everybody and like fend for yourself way, but in the, if we could do this, like we could create an opt-in incentive for everyone to follow the rules that just made sense and without coercion or violence could cause them to cooperate, wouldn't that be a better solution than like forcing them to do things with taxation or the threat of violence or jail? And that belief has been around for a long time. That's on some level libertarianism or anarchy if you want to. But the technology to implement that belief never existed before Bitcoin did. And so that's what radicalized me, is that it's one thing to talk about it, like to read Ursula K. Le Guin, like The Dispossessed or something, and be like, oh, what a fantastical story about what might be one day. It's another thing to see the code that might actually build it. And I think seeing the code and realizing that it actually kind of does work opened me up to believing a lot of things I never would have believed before. And truthfully, I strong opinions weakly held, like I'm still learning and changing what I believe all the time. And Bitcoin is still changing. I don't know what it's going to become. But I know that right now it's it's still causing me to reflect and learn more, and I still value it, and I still kind of feel like I want it to grow, and I'm building companies like this because I think I can help it grow. So yeah, I've been radicalized. I hope I radicalize some people here tonight. Let's see.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that you guys explored security things, right? And so you are now lending, so the use case of people buying their first house, for example, that's a real asset, real property. What do you think the clearest path to using Bitcoin to buy securities in a company is? For example, how could they, I mean, I know ICOs and funding startups, but what about established companies? How do you start transacting?
Right, so like one example, you could use your Bitcoin, get a loan from us, and then use the proceeds to go buy stocks and bonds. Like that's a totally reasonable thing to do. I don't think that's a very common use case for our borrowers. The house is really attractive because it's such a different class of asset, right? Like, and it's something you can live in and use. And I think like Bitcoins are made up digital bullshit, so it's really attractive to be able to connect the weird esoteric digital thing to something totally physical and real. I understand why that's attractive to our borrowers. Given our rates, I don't see our borrowers investing in the equities or traditional securities markets.
Can we ask what your rates and your duration?
Typically 12 to 14% APR. Our loans range from like 3 months all the way up to 5 years. Average is like 2 years. So if you know like the marketplace for interest rates, like that's fairly high. If you have really good credit and you have a really good salary and you have good financial history, you can get a loan unsecured, no collateral, for like 6%, 7% maybe. So our rates are very high, and it's interesting to me why they're so high. Like, and it's because the lending capital markets from which we draw our funds are still very conservative around Bitcoin. They're like, these are great stories. I'm glad you're radicalized, buddy. But like, this has only been around for like 9 years. Like, sounds risky to me. Like they'll lend like the exact same product when we lend against a house. That's a home equity line of credit, and that rate is 2%, 3%, right? Like because houses, like people get houses. Houses aren't going anywhere. Like the government can't make a rule declaring houses illegal. Like they're always going to be there. They're a very safe form of collateral. So Bitcoin is a really ideal form of collateral in every way, except for that it's new and untried. Right, and so I think over time we'll see these rates drop. Like the perception of risk that capital markets assign to cryptocurrencies is way higher, I believe, than their actual risks. I mean, yes, they're volatile, but it's not like you can't get a loan against a volatile stock. You can absolutely get such a loan. Banks are very comfortable giving you that loan because, again, equities and securities are things they understand and they're used to dealing with. Even a stock that in theory could go to zero because the company could implode, like they get it. They understand how to deal with that volatility. We're doing nothing very different than that, except that because the nature of our asset class, everyone is probably rightly very conservative about it. So it's kind of cool on some level that number 12 to 14%. That's the emergent negotiation between super risk averse lending capital markets and very risk-friendly cryptocurrency owners. That's where they kind of wind up in the middle. It's kind of interesting to me.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the role of designers can play in the cryptocurrency and blockchain market. I'm a designer, and I know there are no designers.
Can you please help me make my website less bad?
Actually,
let's talk about
that
it.
bit.
It's a huge role. I have a leg up because I'm super technical and I understand how the code works. And so when I see send money from this thing to that thing, or I see some leakage of abstraction from a low layer into a high level UI layer, it doesn't freak me out or scare me. But like I've worked with like my dad, like trying to get my dad to learn about crypto and buy it, and it's just like there's so many things I will take for granted he's completely uncomfortable with. I mean, because he's also now internalized that if he makes a mistake, he'll likely lose all his crypto, or like some hacker will get in somehow, and he's like very paranoid about that. And my dad's a very smart, good at the computer, technology guy, but he's not like a programmer, right? And he surely doesn't know any of the details around cryptocurrency, and the design is astoundingly bad. Even things like Coinbase, which I think are probably some of the better. So I first bought my Bitcoins on Coinbase back in the day. It makes it feel safe. It makes it feel like this is not super mysterious. But that's not really solving the problem in my mind. Like, if you've used a hardware wallet or something like that, I'm not sure if you have, but getting a hardware wallet for me was a good experience. It helped me level up my own understanding because it didn't hide as much of the complexity. But at the same time, I don't know that it presented that complexity in the best possible way. It took me there were a few bits of research I needed before I could have the aha moment. I'm like, oh, now I understand what your UI is trying to tell me about what you know and don't know about my holdings. We don't have a lot of good metaphors, right? Like computers still have file folders and 3.5-inch disks and stuff as their like visual desktop. You know, like I've been working on a couch since 2007. I don't have a desktop anymore, but those metaphors still exist, and it's so hard to like import a financial metaphor for blockchains, right? Like it's not a bank account. Like a wallet is the worst name ever. Your things are not in here. Like it's a key ring. That's what a wallet is. Like your coins are kept on the blockchain. They're not in the wallet that you think that they're in. It's a misnomer. So like, out of this, good designers have not entered this area yet. Like people who are really good product people and really good designers, they haven't come up with the right vocabulary. We're using the wrong vocabulary and metaphors still, and that is impeding the nature of design in the industry. And I frankly don't know how to fix the problem, but maybe you do.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm really curious about the fact that you played guitar growing up in high school. I know a lot of tech entrepreneurs with backgrounds in science and art. Do you see any of that did that experience kind of manifest itself?
I think at some point I decided would I rather be like a mopey guitar guy or like a weird physics guy, and I went with the weird physics guy. I kind of stopped playing the guitar and stopped being like a music everyday person, which was like a personal loss for a few years. I think I picked up music again later on in life. I'm more of a piano player now. It's easier to play because I get to do multiple voices, so that's more fun since I play by myself. I think I would have been happy in life to be a musician too. I think there's a lot of stuff about taste, right, and so on that drives good musicians, which drives also good scientists and entrepreneurs. But truthfully, I was never good enough for myself, right? And I'm good at this. I was just okay at that, and I think that's a big theme of my life is I like a lot of things, and I do a lot of things all day, but I got to pick something I'm like hopefully truly excellent at. And I think maybe freshman year there was a dude on my floor that was just a way better guitar player than me, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to be it. It's going to be something else for me. So thank God for you, guitar player in my dorm.
Cool. All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks so much.
That was awesome.
Thanks, Damon.
Yeah, no, thanks. And thanks everyone for sticking around.